With the help of some brothers and sisters, this podcast was created to discuss some spiritual topics that you may have questions about. The goal is that you gain a better understanding on the topic, but more importantly, that you grow closer to the Lord. With the help of my little buddy, kick us off.
Stop being cute.
Welcome to Stop Being a Pew Potato. I'm Josh Hudson, and today I'm with two very special people, Colton and Abby Frame. Guys, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Josh.
We're going to start today's episode by quickly touching on what has happened in New York regarding abortion, which will eventually lead into James 1:27, and we're going to finish up by talking about ways to serve those who are adopting. I want to read an article by Mark Weiner from Syracuse.com. He posted this back in January on the 22nd, entitled Historic New York Abortion Vote, How Law Will Change What It Means for Women. And I'm just going to read one excerpt of it, and I'm pretty much going to read it verbatim. And it says, under the rights guaranteed by Roe versus Wade and New York law, all women have the right to an abortion at any time in their first 24 weeks of pregnancy. After 24 weeks, exceptions can be made under federal law when a woman's life or health is at risk. But the 1970 New York law made exceptions only when women's life is at risk. The Reproductive Health Act changes New York's law to permit abortions after 24 weeks in the case where women's life or health, this is where the verbiage changes, would be threatened by continuing the pregnancy. The updated New York law leaves it to the doctors to decide when a woman's health is at risk. Opponents argue that the law should have defined what constitutes the threat to a pregnant woman's health. Republican lawmakers say that this change gives too much authority to the doctors and could open the door for late-term abortion that are not medically necessary. That's the end quote by Mark Weiner. I'd like to add to this, tens of millions of unborn babies are deliberately aborted each year, a number that exceeds the population of many countries. What is happening daily is now being celebrated in our country. We can see that on all forms of media, whether it be online or on television. It is easy to get caught up in what the world believes, but as Christians, we have to remember what the Bible teaches us, and that's, in God's eyes, human life is sacred. Guys, when I read this excerpt here, this is going to draw a lot of emotion from a lot of people.
As a woman, the push in our society is it's a woman's body and it's their choice. However, we have to start teaching it's God's body and He created that life that's inside of that woman's stomach. Conception is when that life begins.
I saw a stat the other day that was talking about, I really enjoy like wars, right? And studying about wars. And one of the things that jumped out at me on when I was looking at this was during the Civil War, there were, hundreds of thousands of deaths. During World War II, there were even more. But if you look at abortions just in the United States, they were double, triple, quadruple that of what those wars were. And yet, when we look at like World War II, we look at how many people we lost during that time and the uproar of a nation. And now it's just an everyday thing. Death is an everyday thing. We don't treat it the same. And when we talk about bringing life into the world, it's how can we bring somebody into this world that can help the furtherance of God's kingdom, right? And the roles that we have inside of that. And it just kind of sets things into reality of this is becoming such a common occurrence. We as a nation, as we continue to go, we're going to get into a state where we can't support ourselves anymore because we're going to be in a state of depression. There was a gentleman I talked to one time, and he said, right now we don't realize the effects that this is having on us. But when you have these women who are struggling right now with, I don't know if I can have this baby, when they turn 30, 40, or 50, they're going to look back and they're going to start having regrets. And we're now going to have a generation that's going to look back and they're not going to know what to do. And we have to think about our role in the church of we have to be there to support somebody and not have that judgment, but rather that warm embrace and bringing them in, because they're going to need us more than ever. They need us now, and what can we do to support them now? This is one of those things, as we continue to go on in time, how can we continue to support these mothers who have made that choice but feel outcast because they're ashamed of what they did when they were younger, right? Because sometimes pressure builds up, society, that peer pressure that we talk about all the time, that can build up and that can really eat away at somebody.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And what I was thinking when you were talking is how we're so critical as Christians. We're so mad about this, what's happening in New York, and we have the right to be. But we get so critical of the mothers, instead of us trying to help them like you just described, we just get mad about it.
I think there's a lack of love being shown, and we have to really guard ourselves that although we don't agree with the choices being made, we also have to be willing to allow someone to come to a realization that it was wrong and show them the love, and they need to feel open to coming to that, and that we will accept them and still love them even though they made a bad choice, because all of us have made bad decisions at some point.
In the very beginning, when you started your comments off, I was thinking about something we've talked about just earlier off the program. Women, they're celebrating this, and they feel like, well, first of all, men don't understand, like we talked about earlier. It's their bodies. There's this. It's almost like this human body inside of them doesn't even exist. This is their bodies. That's why they have the ability to celebrate it.
It is our body, but that baby inside of you I can't remember the exact day, but a baby's heartbeat starts so early on. Mm-hmm. That child is forming fingers and toes, growing every single day. It's not just a fetus, as we like to call it, or as society likes to call it. It is a child. It is a living human being. And so as much as that mother's life matters, so does that baby, not fetus. It's a baby inside of her growing, and that life matters too. And what about their choice to live? What about their choice? They might not be able to speak, but when did we get to decide who lives and who dies? We wouldn't make that decision for someone who was older. We don't make that decision, right? Everyone sits back and says, how disgusting. So why are we entitled to make it for a baby just because they're in the womb and they're relying on someone else to nurture and care for them? Yes, we want to love these mothers. We need to show that love, but we also don't agree with the decision that's being pushed down everyone's throats by society. So it's time to stand for something that is an alternative so that these mothers have a place to go and they feel like there's another option, and they're not just cornered into, this is all I can do.
This going back to this thought that I said, in God's eyes, human life is sacred. It's at Jeremiah where he says, in the womb I knew you. That is what we're trying to talk about. This leads us right into the scripture that's kind of the foundation of our conversation moving forward, and that's James 1:27. This is the English Standard Version, and James writes this: religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. A lot of Christians do not take this verse seriously. It's my opinion the church is not as strong as it should be with doing what James writes in verse 27. I think it is so important to point out that adoption in a Christian's mind must be much more than just a fix, not being able to have children. Rather, adoption is the responsibility of Christians and something we all have to find ways to contribute towards. You guys know this better than I do, but adoption is a beautiful thing. You guys have been blessed by adoption and are here to help shed some light on your continued journey and hopefully encourage others to join in this journey with you.
Yeah, and Josh, when we look at this, it is so important to see the need for us as Christians to no longer just sit back and just accept decisions being made, but to take action and to do something about it. We see the world changing, but what are we doing to show that we will not be conformed, but rather transformed, knowing God's will on this matter and choosing to do something about it? The whole book of James touches on us not just being hearers of the word, but doers, and this is the perfect example of us as Christians being called to do. We sit in outrage at the law and bills being passed, and yet we go, what can I do? We share posts on social media. We talk about it in a safe space with other Christians. What are we really doing to step up and stop this from continuing? We hope to encourage these people listening to leave this podcast ready to run into action. That's the entire purpose of what we're doing here, is to take that action. And we look in James 4:17, and it says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And in James 1:22, it says, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. We read these verses and we talk about them. It goes in one ear and out the other. And so what we're trying to do here and what we're trying to look is help people open their eyes and to see that there's much more that they can do. Sometimes people don't take action because they don't know what to do, and we can't fault people for that. Sometimes it's one of those we have to take a stand and we have to try to say, how can I better educate myself on a situation? How can I take action? And how can I put my work and my talents that God gave me, because I was spared and I was able to have life, how can I give back to those who don't have that choice?
When I thought about asking you guys to come on, I was really thinking about this selfishly. Most of the episodes that have been recorded so far have been ways to serve. And so I was thinking we need to talk about ways to serve the people that are in the adoption process or that are adopting. And I really didn't think about abortion initially. I think, Abby, you brought it up. Right now, this is a sore spot for us. This point in the episode, I want to focus on ways to serve those who are adopting. And this is going to be more like an interview kind of setting from here on out. I got some questions that I put together. And the first one is, and whoever would like to answer, go ahead. What are the challenges you face when adopting that people may not know about?
I think as both of us, but especially being a female, one of the greatest challenges you face is the amount of fear and uncertainty and the unknowns that go with adopting. You hear stories, it's all in movies, but the reality is every person's story is different. And so you don't know what to expect, even though you think you might because you see it talked about. And it's this huge emotional roller coaster that ultimately can be really heartbreaking at times. The end goal is super rewarding, but the in-between is really hard. Much like the mother and father feel when you find out you're matched or you're going to have a baby and there's a birth mother, you're so excited. However, that excitement soon turns into all these other thoughts. And it's the same kinds of thoughts sometimes that a parent might have. There's also this variety of thoughts that never cross through a biological parent's mind. I can remember sitting at the dining room table, eating dinner with my family, and we had just been matched, and I looked across the table and just said, I wonder what she's eating for dinner. Does she have food? Does she even have a house? Who's taking care of her? And then your mind just goes down this tunnel and it doesn't stop. You constantly are reminded of those things every day. When you're doing something, your mind is going, what's she doing? How's the baby doing? Is she going to her checkups? Is she okay? Because ultimately, we only get to know what they tell us. It's really hard emotionally, and it wears on you. As soon as you find out there's a baby and you're matched with them, they're not growing in my stomach, but that child is growing in both of our hearts. And it's so much more than just excitement. it's genuine love because there's a life, and as a Christian you view it as a life. So as soon as you find out that life is going to be something you're going to be caring for, you're attached. And I don't know that, I think women can just instantly, as soon as a woman finds out she's pregnant, they're attached to that baby. And so it's the same way. The heartbreaking part is that sometimes there can be disruptions that happen, and it's emotional for families. And so honestly, I was an emotional train wreck the entire time we were going through the process, because you have really good days where maybe you're super busy and you don't think about it as much. But then you lay down in bed at night and you start to pray, and you realize that you really need to pray a lot to God because you need him to get through it. And I had to learn that I could no longer take care of all the emotions I was feeling. I needed to turn it over to God. It was one of those stop and pray, and I might be weeping, but I needed to be on my knees praying to God about it, because it was only he was going to be able to give me relief from all of those emotions. And it was challenging but beautiful at the same time for us to grow that relationship with God and learn to cling to his word and to have trust in him.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but one thing that I was thinking about, the things you just said there, when you think about James 1:27 and the things that have been said so far, we automatically realize that you're going to save a soul. That's your end goal. I mean, obviously, to adopt a child, that's going to be awesome, to be parents, but it's to save the soul. What I found interesting about your comments so far is that, yes, you want to save Maverick, but you grew closer to God in this process.
I think it's really interesting that we had to grow closer to God, and not only were we wanting to, save a soul or put a soul in a situation where we can train him up to know God, but you also have this little bit of window where you can have an impact on a birth mother. And Colton and I took that really seriously, that anytime we could have any form of interaction, whether it was a video call, we would Skype. You sometimes get to Skype, sometimes you do phone calls. It varies. Even if it was an email, we wanted her to know that we loved her. You try within those little encounters to show that love and to also show that God loves her. And it's your one time to possibly alter her relationship with God and maybe have an impact there as well. And when you first think about adoption, I don't think we really thought about that. But you do. You have this chance, and it's you have to find the right times, because you don't want to be pushy. You don't want to just shove it down but by extending our love and our grace, and by showing her that in indirect ways, you hope that maybe, just maybe, you did something that can make her long for something that was there or see the light. You want to be that salt. So I think both of us, that was something that we really tried to figure out, how can we do this?
Well, and you grow up really fast. I mean, we were 23 when we started this, and when we were sitting there talking with her, at 23, I'm trying to figure out, what do I want to do professionally? Where do I want to live? How many kids do I want to have? Like all these different things. And you're sitting there with this family, like we were sitting on a Skype call one night with them, and they said, okay, what do you want him to be when he grows up? Do you want him to play sports? Do you want him to do all these things? But then they asked the question, what is your viewpoint on religion? And it's one of those things where you're never, it's always one of those intimidating things to talk sometimes to someone about Christ, especially if you don't know if you have all the answers or what their viewpoints are, because you don't want to offend somebody. But it was one of the opportunities that we had to tell her about Christ and say, this is how we're going to raise your children, because these are my beliefs, these are my convictions. And ultimately my goal for this child is to have them be in heaven with God one day. And I said, if I do nothing else, I want you to know that. And some people won't say that because they're afraid that they'll have a disagreement with a parent. But it's our goal, and it's our calling to stand for what Christ says. no matter what the circumstances are, and to preach God, in Christ and his way in every way that we can.
It made the rubber meet the road, because when you're asked that and you're sitting there just hoping we're going to still get to, go on this journey with you. We still want this baby really bad. And they ask you and you have to go, we have to be honest about this, because this is who we are and this is what we believe. We also don't want you to leave this call and go, those people aren't getting my child. But ultimately, that's what God calls us to do, is to talk about it and to not shy away from it. Even though there was a part of us sitting there, I think both of us went, we're going to be honest and real, and we might walk away from this phone call and she can say, nope, they're not getting my child.
I think it's very powerful to listen to what you said so far, but to think that you spent time to actually talk to the mother that way, not just about what you're going to do with the son, but just, you said, be the salt. So many times people that haven't been through the process, we just this is going to sound awful, look at mothers as, well, they gave their kid up. When they are showing this true strength, that's really unbelievable, that they can now put their child in a position to thrive. When we started talking about the abortion thing, I feel like we hit it and we made some points on it, but ultimately, what I've heard from you guys is that you care for the mother.
I think society can, and especially it can happen even with a Christian, because you don't know how else to feel except for anger at the thought that someone could even think about aborting a child. So we just get filled with anger, but we're not in those situations and we haven't walked their walk.
Right.
And we don't know. And so you have to stop judging and start realizing that all you can do is try to make an impact where you are placed and make a difference within that moment. For us, we view Maverick's birth mother as a family member. I met her for less than 24 hours, but I love her because she made that ultimate sacrifice to give my child life, even though it was probably an inconvenience to her life and not an easy decision. And it's not easy to sign papers and to walk out of a hospital not holding your biological child. For us, that's something that I think we both are very passionate about, is we have to show those birth mothers who do choose life love, but we also need to show love to those who maybe made a bad decision and just didn't know the ramifications or understand and chose the other alternative, which is devastating. But I think we touched on it. There's going to be ramifications for that, if not now, maybe 10 to 15 years from now, and they're going to need us to love them.
Well, and talking just real quick on this, and we talked, Abby just mentioned, everyone thinks that the day you get your baby is like the most joyous day ever, and it is. But it's also, I think, in my mind, when I think back through my life, we've dealt with death and sickness and different things like that. But the hardest day of my life, too, was that day where we got our baby. And the reason I say that is we had to sit there in the hospital room. The mom gives us Maverick, and she looks at you in the eyes and just says, "He's yours. I trust you with him. Take good care of him. I love you." And then she turns and walks out the door. That's one of those moments where it's probably the most emotional part of my entire life, but it's the happiest day, and yes, it's the saddest day, because she's going away empty-handed, and it's not because she's selfish, but because she's selfless. Mm-hmm. And she wants someone else to be able to carry that forward and to give him what is best, because she had the love for him.
We talked about the challenges. What can someone do to help with those challenges?
It's so important to treat an adoptive family just as you would any other expected family, right? Even adoptive families of older children, they're still really, really excited with their additions, and they need the support from those around them. Adoptive parents need encouragement and support, and often I think this can all be overshadowed by people's curiosity into the birth mother and child's story, that they forget to just shower the adoptive family with love and allow them to share the rest if and when they need to. Sometimes it's very emotional. You don't want to open up. You want to kind of close that off. And you just have to be understanding of that, right? Everyone goes through different things. I mean, there's times where we went through the process and it was one of those where, I can't relate. I don't know if anybody else can empathize with me, but I need you just there. I need you to listen. And also just, when you're talking with those families, validate that their emotions, and do not disregard them just because they're adoptive parents. A lot of times I think people get in their minds that, well, I don't understand why it's such a big deal. You've never met the family, you've never talked to you never held the baby. And it's one of those, it's like, no, that's my child. And a lot of times that doesn't come across and that doesn't register with some people.
And I think to touch on that, when we came back with Maverick, that's all still really raw. I mean, when you come back and you've gone through the experience of even everyone's just excited, right? Because you've adopted this baby and it's so wonderful. And it's like when a mom walks into church and she's had her baby and she comes in after a few weeks and everyone's just excited. We experienced the greatest gain, but also suffered a loss, and so did Maverick. And when you think about that and let it just soak in for a second, that yes, we're walking in and we are so elated and blessed by that baby. And this goes for older children as well. A parent that walks in with any adopted child is so blessed and they know it. However, there's also a part of them that the child and the adoptive parent are suffering some form of loss. Adoption is beautiful, but it also is a loss. It's a loss of biological parents. Maverick, as a baby, might not have experienced that, but Colton and I most definitely felt that weight of what that meant for our child as he grows older. And he wasn't old enough to register it, but we were. When we walked in anywhere and people are excited, there was a part of us that we put on a smile, but at the same time, I can remember coming home and there would just be days where it would just all emotionally be too much. And both of us would just feel that way, where you can't even put into words. You just feel very emotional. And it goes back to that they just need the emotional support, because it is a roller coaster. And even when you think you got off and you have this baby and all's well, there's still these after effects of some emotions that you still deal with, and it doesn't go away. You're always going to have things that come up. I just think that ties in to kind of our point before, and is something that we still feel currently.
And in talking, I mean, in light of what we're talking about in this podcast of what you can do, one of the biggest things that you can do is pray. And just pray fervently, right? And have faith that God will provide, that he will guide the family in the best ways to move forward. Because it's one of those, being a parent is very, very difficult, but knowing what to do as a parent and go through all these things, no one prepares you for that. Literally, when we got Maverick, we got a call. It was like 7:30 on a Wednesday night. They said, hey, be in Florida tomorrow. And it was one of those where I go from just an everyday person to I am now a dad within less than 24 hours. And you're trying to process all this. You have a wife who's extremely emotional and you're trying to figure out how, I always put my foot in my mouth and I don't always know what the things to say are. And so you just do the best you can, but just pray throughout the entire process and have faith that God will deliver, and that, God will make sure that they can persevere.
For you guys, in the process you went through, what did a brother or sister do that was helpful, and how did they do that?
We had so many people involved and constantly helping us and praying for us during the whole process. One thing that really stands out to me was after our first adoption disruption. And we've mentioned that word, the disruption, earlier. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it's basically when something happens that causes for whatever reason, that adoption to not happen. We were initially matched. We started our process. We got our home study done, and then you put out your profile and you start viewing birth parents' profiles. And when you like one, you let them view your profile. It's very funny, and when you describe it, it reminds me of kind of like a dating site. Essentially, you view theirs, and if you like them, you're like, hey, you can view my profile and I'm interested. And if that birth mother selects you, you move forward. So we were selected. That birth mother was through her first trimester. We announced, and we were actually selected on the day that Roe versus Wade was passed.
Wow.
Here we are, and a birth mother chose life and chose us. And it was a moment where you sit back and go, she just made that selfish decision, even though someone years ago decided to make this an option. And you have you just sit there and are so grateful. So we're thrilled. We announce, everyone is praying. I feel like everyone around us was equally as attached to this baby as we were. That roller coaster, we're still on it, and we're having Skype calls, and we've spoken to birth mother and birth father at this point. That was in January. March, the start of March, we get a call on a Wednesday, and I just walked in from work, and I see my phone ringing, and I knew the number, and so I pick up, and they said, we just want to let you know, we don't really know much, but birth mother has gone into early labor. All we know is that she's at the hospital. We'll kind of let you know as we find out more. And there were some other things they said, but honestly, I couldn't tell you what they said because all I heard was she's in labor. And at this point, our baby was 23 to 24 weeks along.
Oh, wow.
And so I hung up the phone, and my mom and sister just so happened to be at the house. And I remember I just looked at them and just started to cry because we all know that that's not good. And you're left with all these questions. What's going on? Tell me more. And you don't get more. You got that. And that's all we can give you right now. And so Colton comes home. We talk. We go to Bible class. Come home.
I'm sure you weren't concentrating when you were at Bible class.
So distracted, not focused, and all you can do is just keep living, which sounds like obvious, but you just want to curl up in a ball, rock on the floor, and just say, call me, and you just want to blow the phone up. So we waited, and we waited, and Saturday came around, and honestly, I think both of us thought no news is good news, maybe. And so the phone rang on Saturday, and it was Colton's birthday.
Oh, wow.
And so we're out celebrating we were hiking. And the phone rang, and Colton and I both stopped. They said that birth mom went into labor, and on Friday, she delivered the baby boy as a stillborn. And I can remember both of us had kind of had time to prepare, but you can't really prepare for what that feels like. We said, okay. And they said, we really don't know much more, but we wanted you guys to know. And that was pretty much the end of that phone call. And here we are on this trail, and I just remember both of us going, God's got to have a plan. And for whatever reason, this was not the plan. So we finish and we go home, and you have to tell your family, and you relive it, and you just sit and kind of wonder why. And then you just go back to because God's in control. We had to go to church the next morning, which I say that as like we had to, but it was because we knew walking in that we were going to be flooded with people who were excited and loved us, and to share it with them, it was like ripping the Band-Aid off really fast, because it made it very official and very real that everyone was going to know, and we were going to have to relive that moment. We couldn't just curl up in a ball and stay in our house. We had to let people know, because they were on that journey with us too. And so at the end of services, I can't remember which elder announced it, but now looking back, I can't imagine having to make the announcement.
Yeah.
From their perspective, no one wants to have to say that. And of course, we just sat there, and all I could do was just cry silently on my pew. When they finished announcing, they stopped and they prayed. And during that prayer, they didn't just pray for us. They prayed for that birth mother, which really meant a lot, because she didn't have anybody. And she needed our prayers, because if anyone was experiencing that loss, it wasn't just us, it was her. And it didn't matter who she was or if she was a Christian or not, she needed those prayers. It was really painful, but also we had an outpour of everybody. And I laugh because we have a really big congregation, and you might not realize it until you're standing there and you're weeping, and so is everybody else in the congregation, and they're all coming up to you and hugging you, and just in that moment acknowledging that your pain is real, and they were feeling it too, which is exactly what we needed in that moment, was to be able to express our emotion, to not be judged for feeling so emotional, and to have it validated, and to have the prayers of that entire congregation and many more as they found out. One thing that stuck out to me, and always has, and is something that I will forever walk away with remembering, is one of our sisters at the time came up and embraced me, and she looked at me and she said, "Your job as a parent and a Christian is to get your children to heaven and to be with God. And you might not have held that baby, but God is with that baby, and you did your job as a parent." And there's not much you can say to someone when they go through that. It's one of the hardest things, in my opinion, to ever have to try to console someone who's lost a child of any age. But that is what I walked away with, and that is what I still think in my head when I think about that baby, or when those sonogram pictures that arrived a week after we were told that baby was a stillborn, and we got him in the mail, and you sit there and look at that life that's in that picture and that baby, and we still have them. I think about that baby is with God, and that is the best place for that child. And for whatever reason, God had a different plan. Those brothers and sisters were there for us. And on a lighter note, they were there for us 2 weeks later when we got a call during Bible class. And I say we, but it was Colton who got a call, and they said,
"So we have a child." And Dana was, it was 7:30 at night, and Dana was with Sacred Selections. And Dana called, and she goes, I have a baby. Do you want him?
Wow.
And I said, "I don't know, Dana." I said, let me go talk to Abby. And she says, "Okay, well, let me know." So I went and got Abby out of Bible class, and she was teaching, and I said, "They got a baby. Do we want him?" And she goes, "Yeah, call him back." Like,
Jeez, what are you thinking?
I was like, why are we hesitating? That's an obvious yes. We want this baby.
and so I called Dana back, and she said, she said, "Hold tight. You're going to need to be here tomorrow, but let me see what all we need to do." And so
The waiting.
From that moment, like I couldn't go back to Bible class. I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say to anybody. I'm going to be disruptive. Like I can't do this.
They'll be able to hear your heartbeat.
Exactly. and so after that, we're standing out there and everyone's coming around because, I mean, you could probably see it on our face. My face was probably white because I had no idea what was going on.
And I was teaching a kids class at the time. And so all the kids in the class, everyone was on this roller coaster with us. Those kids in class heard him say, "There's a baby."
Oh,
so
wow.
all of them are crying and weeping. And they're like, "There's a baby. You're going to get a baby. Like, it's happening." It was just one of those moments that, again, they were there for the lowest of the lows, but they were there when we needed them. And we were in the bathroom, and my mom is weeping, and these women are all coming in, and they're like, "We're going to have plane tickets for you, and we've got it. Like, we're getting those right now." And we're like, "Wait, you can't book them yet. Like, we haven't been told where we're going." And I can just remember they were already offering.
Wow.
And we didn't know anything,
Right.
but they were ready to take action.
I think so many times, for those who haven't adopted, you just assume, well, financially I need to be there. But what sounded equally or more important was emotionally, as if you're a brother or sister and someone's adopted, you need to be there. This leads to another question. Did you ever feel lonely in the process of adopting?
I think for us that loneliness it's obviously something that we felt at times during the process, but it's mainly set in post-adoption for us because we had such great support during the whole process. Now there can be times where we feel isolated as we go through different obstacles that you feel like not everyone is going to understand, and you can sometimes feel like not everyone cares.
But we know it's not the case, all the time, but it sure does sometimes feel like it. If you just see our family, we are happy and living a blessed life, but we are constantly being challenged and dealing with things you can really never prepare for. Life throws at you so many different things, but the biggest issue is really constant judgment.
For listeners who don't know, we adopted interracially, and so we stand out in public, and that's okay. You get used to the stares and some of the looks and just people really gawking. You get used to that after, at least we did. The first 6 months might have been kind of like you noticed it, and then after that, it fades into the background because life goes on and people are going to look and you just keep it moving. But what really is hurtful is that people stereotype our child based on his looks. They also make assumptions because he is adopted. And to get really real, some of those can get down to, well, there must be something wrong with him because what person would give up a baby, right? So he has to have something wrong, or there had to be something with the birth mother. As a parent sitting back parenting him, and any parent can relate to, when someone talks about your child or insinuates something, you have a protective mama, daddy bear instinct. And it's no different with him. It's just, it is because things are said more frequently, and it's not always out of malice. Sometimes it's just ignorance, and we have to try to teach with love some of that ignorance away, and sometimes we have to stand our ground and with love say something isn't okay. As much as this happens in the world, it can happen with other Christians, which can be really painful to deal with. For us, I think we just have acknowledged that Maverick is going to have many challenges as he gets older, not just now, but through his entire life, that children who are with their biological families will not experience. We don't always have the answers, and we know that. And that can be really challenging because as a parent, it's already hard enough. So when you add in all these unknowns, it gets a little trickier. And so it's just uncharted territory for us. It will be for Maverick. And it's going to require us to have that full village of support from everyone. And so it can be lonely, but I think as long as people offer that support, it's still doable. And we don't want to discourage anyone by being real, but it's good to know too.
I think it's interesting about this loneliness part of it, that I think that, at least me, I assume that you go through those hills and valleys in the front end of adoption. Just some of the things you described with the stillborn child, and then 2 weeks later you're on this hill, right? And to know that this loneliness, that's something that listeners, when you're involved in your local congregation, you need to be very attentive to ones who adopt. That it's great that it happened, but do not cut off communication and love at that point, because it sounds like from what you just described, you need it continuously.
Yeah, it's a never ending journey, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think it's a journey that you're going to be on the rest of your child's life, and you're going through it with them.
So with this loneliness, what could someone have done to help with that? I guess we kind of really covered that, but what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so some of the steps that maybe people can help you with is really being able to form that genuine relationship. You know, we always walk by somebody and say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And we just say good and move on. And we need to be able to say, "No, seriously, how are you doing today?" We'll be able to see past that, not just take their answer for what it is sometimes. And when we talk about bonding together as Christian brothers and sisters, are supposed to know one another, so that way we can help them with whatever they need and be able to provide that. Also, some other things that you can do is just educate yourself on what they might be going through, with some do's and don'ts. There's certain things to say, some things not to say in an adoption. But in order to support an adoptive family, you must fully support what was stated in the beginning. Adoption is not just a way to fill your family out of convenience, but a way to fulfill God's commands of caring for all of his children. The support for an adoptive family cannot just stop once the child is home and adopted. As we've been talking about, is a journey that both the family and the child need constant love and support through. Adoption is a lifelong journey through so many unknowns, and the more active role you take in the world of adoption, the more likely you're going to be able to relate to those around you who are in that journey. Taking an active role is in being pro-life can do so much to connect us spiritually, which is critical.
The episode title is, ways to serve those who are adopting, and that brings us to the next question: what should your church family be looking for in ways to serve during the process, or maybe even after?
And to answer that question, I think the greatest act of service any adoptive family wants to see throughout the whole process and after that is for their fellow brethren to be called to take action themselves. We live in a world where the value of a child's life is not seen. So as a child of God, we too are saved by adoption ourselves, right? So adoptive families, as adoptive families, we want to see others' hearts change and soften to the point that they want to adopt or join the fight to help others adopt because they see the need. And God commands us to have active faith, and that is no different. There are children and expecting mothers everywhere who need every Christian to join the fight. There's a shortage of people who want to do that, but we have to be able to, if we can't ourselves do it, be able to support those who are willing to do that or who are in a better position to do that.
We started by talking about this new law. We talked about how people are very upset by it. And to come full circle, I was online. We see it happening among Christians where it's this slacktivism. And it's a new term that I saw, but it's really resonated and struck a chord. We know something's wrong, and we're active about it in a very slacking way. We are not really stopping and doing anything to try to help prevent it from continuing. Like we said, we like a post, we comment on something, we share things on social media, but what are we doing to step up for those mothers who are in those situations? There are mothers all over the world who are choosing abortion, and society is sitting back and praising them for making that decision, that it's their body, it's their choice. And many women feel like they don't have another option. And how are we providing them with an alternative? If you want her to give life, you got to sit back and say, am I willing to give that life a home?
Amen.
Am I willing to raise that child? Her choice of adoption is one that is selfless, and it is not easy. And it's so easy for us to sit back and say, how did she put herself in that situation? It's not my responsibility, but is that us showing God's love and grace in the same way that we want it extended to us? Because James reads pretty thoroughly on that as well, that we don't need to judge lest we be judged that same way. And I know that, yeah, it might not be abortion, but I have stumbling blocks as well.
Right.
And I'm not perfect. And so we have to step up. And none of us are worthy of that grace. And so to condemn another is not the answer. It's obvious that the devil wants us to doubt ourselves. He wants us to say, it's not the right time to adopt. I don't have the means to do it. I have no way to help because I don't have enough money. We're not in that phase of life where I have extra cash floating around. But there really are tangible ways for you to make a difference. And so I think that's where we just want to try to encourage to have that working faith, and not just the one where we're sitting behind a screen typing or sharing, but an active faith, and we're helping. And so that's, to us, something that's a way to serve, and it's really important.
I think that'll kind of rattle some cages, because a lot of times you just think, well, people know what I think and believe because of what I put on Facebook. Well, it's much bigger than that. There's something you can do.
Yeah, and when we're talking about ways to help with that, right? If you can't adopt, or if you're not in a position to, when we went to Florida to get Maverick, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can't just leave immediately. We were down there for 2 weeks, and it was funny. Like, we were too young; we couldn't rent a car. So it's like we flew into Jacksonville. We had to have somebody rent us a car. We drove to Tallahassee and then drove back to Jacksonville. And luckily, we had Abby's sister and her husband used to live down in Georgia, and they used to attend a church in the Jacksonville area. And so when we got down there, they said, there was a family that they were really close friends with. They said, hey, you can use our house. They said, we're actually going on vacation. Here's the keys to our cars.
Wow.
The fridge is stocked. Here's all the rooms. Here's the fresh sheets. Here's everything that you need to do. Laundry detergent's in there. And they said, oh, by the way, we've already made the calls to the people in the church, and they're going to be bringing you food every day. Don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about any groceries. They're also going to bring you children's toys and all the things that you're going to need in your first 2 weeks to care for this baby. Don't worry about anything. If you need anything, let us know. And some of those people, they probably financially couldn't do a lot, right? I mean, they could probably make us a meal. Some of them don't, brought over some of their kids' toys, and they said, hey, here's a few things, or here's...
We had pack and plays delivered, bottles. I mean, you name it. It was at the door the next morning when we woke up, when we had slept one night, and under 24 hours notice, they showed up with food to last for weeks. And they didn't just stop with one delivery. They checked in every day. There was someone new calling and saying, what do you need? What can I do? And this doesn't just happen in Florida. This is all over the country, that there are families who they are ready. They have a room set up, and they pretty much say to Dana at Sacred Selections, look, if you've got a family, call us. We will host them. And they open their doors, and that is a huge form of service. You have expenses, obviously, So to not have to worry about where you're going to be housed for 2 weeks, and on top of that, to be in the comfort of someone's home is so much better than being in a hotel room. I can remember they were just so excited to be a part of it, and they were willing to do whatever. But, when they hand us their car keys and are like, do what you need to, go where you want to go. We know you probably need to go to a store and get some baby items because this was not planned. And you just sit back. And I think both of us just went, God's hand is in all of this. And it's because it's God's will and not ours. It's all very eye-opening, and you just see God's power. It was one of those moments where your mind is blown.
Well, when we talked multiple times, you've heard us use the word control. Abby and I are very much the same type of people who, if things aren't in a certain order, we have stress. And a lot of this process, we aren't in control. We're being told constantly what is going on. There's nothing we can do about it. And Josh, I'm sure you're the same way. If we were to ask Haley, if you have to plan something, sometimes we're not the best at it. And so even if I
think that's fair.
If Abby's like, hey, I need you to plan us going to Florida for 2 weeks, there's no way I would have ever been able to do that.
I'm actually glad Haley's not here so she can't respond to that.
Yes. So it's one of those where you have to realize at the end of this that there's prayers are being answered, right? That you don't have control, but you don't need it, because at the end of the day, if you have faith in God, God will provide. And it's one of those, you can't describe it to people. And the one thing that when our adoption story comes up, whether it's in the workplace or with friends, it's one of those, I don't know if you believe in God or what your belief is, but let me tell you a story that couldn't have happened any other way.
Wow.
And it's another intro into sharing Christ, but it's also one of those of, I'm in awe of how God works, and there's no way that I can fully comprehend everything that he does for us, but we have to have faith at the end of the day.
You guys have talked about sacred selections a couple of times, and you've mentioned Dana a couple of times. Obviously there may be some people that are learning about this. They might even do a little research afterwards. I think that there's going to be people that listen to this and know, you know what, I can do that. I can give a room. I can provide food. And you mentioned, my question was, how do they get in contact with somebody so that they can, I guess, be put on a list or something? And that may sound like a dumb question, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
No, so it's not, I think sometimes people are willing, and it's until you go through this experience, you might not know all the avenues that you can actually help. And I know my mom was one of those people who sat back, and she now, anytime there's anything that she thinks she can help a family, she knows how much people helped us.
Right.
And she goes, I have the room, and I have the ability, and I have space, I have cars, and she's always willing. So it is important to talk about it. Sacred Selections is a nonprofit organization, which their mission is to place children in loving Christian homes. And these are children of all ages, all adoptable ages. And if you sit here and go, I'm interested in adopting, I want you to reach out to Dana. But if you also are just going, I can help in other ways because maybe it's not the right time, I want you to reach out to Dana. And so you can do that if you go to sacredselections.org. Anything that you could possibly need to know, it's either on that site, or if you scroll down or find the contact us. Dana Carroza lives and breathes by her phone, because this woman spends night and day getting calls and finding children homes. But not only doing that, but dealing with us as parents and expectant parents, all of our calls of concerns, worries, or just wanting to chat, because she does understand a lot of what we go through. If you think you have a way to help, she will put you to work.
There you go.
And so whatever it might be, and you might think it's something small, as simple as delivering meals if there was a family near. For an adoptive family, there is no small act you can do that is too minuscule to do it. Just do it. To not take that from any other company, but don't stop yourself, because I think that's the devil creeping in saying, oh, there's enough people doing this. There are enough hands on deck. Can there ever really be enough hands on deck when it's dealing with children, God's children, who all of us are important to him?
Yeah, and one way to give back on that, or to get more involved, is every year all over the nation there are fundraisers, and there's dinners and auctions that go on. And we're about to have one on March 16th here at the Loveless Cafe here in Tennessee. And every year there's an auction that goes up, and all proceeds from the entire fundraiser go to 100% go to funding adoptions. And during that night, Dana gets up and she talks about people's stories. And you look around and everyone's got their tissues, right? And it's one of those where every time we leave one of those, I'm like, Abby, we need another baby. And she goes, we can't. She's like, we need to, be careful about going to these things, because I can't have this many kids. And it's one of those, is like, but maybe we can, right? And it's one of those where you can give back, even if you have no money to buy anything at the auction. Just your seat at the table and showing support for the family being supported that night, or showing your support just in the community and being a part of that, is something much larger than all of us. And so, like I said, that was March 16th at the Loveless Cafe this year. We'd love to see you there, and we'd love your support.
After Colton and I adopted, we were the family for the 2016 Sacred Selections fundraiser in Middle Tennessee. And we had such an outpouring of love and support from people we didn't know. They were just Christians having active faith and doing. And both of us went, okay, we've adopted, and we need to take care of this child right now. However, we don't want to just sit back and be passive and we've got our baby and so we're done. I think both of our eyes were open that this is something that we have to actively participate in. As a Christian, we are called to do the work, and it can't just be when it's benefiting us, because there are children everywhere and there are parents who are hoping to adopt. And so we have taken an active role in just helping, and it's just volunteering, and it doesn't have to be anything huge. It doesn't have to be writing big checks, but it's time. You can donate goods. It's what you have the ability to do. And so I think sometimes people just go, pump the brakes. I can't adopt and I don't have lots of money. There's nothing I can do. But I just want you to sit back and really ask yourself, like, am I really doing everything I can? Do I have talents that I'm able to offer? And it doesn't have to be money related. Do I have an ability to create things? Am I crafty? Is there something I can donate, a good that maybe I make, or a service that I am, my job? Like, you think it, and I am sure that your skill, that whatever God's blessed you to be able to do, is needed. And so for us, we saw so many people that didn't know us, and they didn't know us anything, and they didn't care because they were passionate about it. And so we sit here, we're passionate, and it's just because we have a love for those children, those families, and ultimately for God.
We started this conversation by reading James 1:27. I'm going to read it in closing. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and keep oneself unstained from the world. We talked about ways to serve those who are adopting today. You guys, thankfully, had a lot of folks that helped serve you. And like you've touched on, and we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about talents, there's something that you could be doing. When I read this verse again, the reason I read it is because in my life, I've read this verse and thought, people should be doing something. We see widows in our congregations, they're visible, And so we'll do things from time to time. But all the stuff that we've talked about today, I feel like children get lost. So it's almost like we're only doing part of what this verse is saying. We're not helping out the kids. To finish this, there is something you can be doing. You can show support emotionally, and you can also go to one of these sacred selections functions that we've talked about. I guess when with that, March 16th. If you're in Middle Tennessee, I know a lot of folks listen. They're everywhere. It sounds like Dana's the main contact. If you're not Middle Tennessee, there's a function somewhere for you to go to. Well, guys, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you taking time. I know some of this stuff was intimate and emotional, and I got a lot out of it personally, and I'm sure it's encouraged other people.
Yeah, and we thank you for doing this and for taking the time with us, and we hope that if anyone has any questions that they're never scared to ask, and we're here to support everyone because everyone supports us. So we appreciate your time and the listeners' time as well.
And ultimately, we want everything to be for God and for His glory. And all of the things that were talked about, I think, are helping us get to that goal.
Thanks for listening to the show. Please review, share,